You're fired. Pack your desk and get out." Edmund Frost didn't look up from his mahogany desk as he delivered the words, his white dress shirt crisp under the fluorescent office lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Agent Nora Callahan stood in the doorway of his corner office, her green blouse and black slacks perfectly pressed, her expression calm as she absorbed his casual cruelty. "I don't need another diversity hire with an attitude problem poisoning my team," he continued, finally lifting his cold blue eyes to meet hers. Behind him, the Seattle skyline gleamed in the midday sun, while security footage captured every word he spoke. Edmund had no idea that for the past 6 months, the woman he was humiliating had been systematically documenting his company's discriminatory practices, and his termination speech was about to become federal evidence. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. Agent Nora Callahan's heart rate remained steady as she watched Edmund Frost lean back in his leather chair, his smugness radiating across the spacious corner office. The tiny recording device, sewn into her green blouse, captured every word, every pause, every breath of his discriminatory tirade. She had trained for moments like this, learned to compartmentalize the rage that threatened to surface when faced with such blatant racism disguised as corporate authority. "Your attitude has been a problem since day one," Edmund continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "When I hired you 6 months ago, I thought maybe you'd be different. But you're just like the rest of them, always complaining, always causing drama." The way he emphasized them made his meaning crystal clear, and Agent Nora Callahan filed every inflection into her mental evidence catalog. She thought back to her first day at Frost Technologies, when she'd walked through these same glass doors as Nora Williams, supposedly a junior marketing analyst with an MBA from Northwestern. The FBI's background specialists had crafted her identity perfectly, complete with references, academic records, and a work history that would pass any corporate scrutiny. Her real mission was far more complex than selling software solutions. The federal investigation had begun after a pattern of complaints reached the Department of Justice. Too many qualified black professionals were being mysteriously passed over, terminated, or forced out of Frost Technologies. The company's federal contracts required diversity compliance, yet their workforce remained overwhelmingly white in leadership positions. Agent Nora Callahan's job was to get inside, document the systematic discrimination, and gather evidence of what investigators suspected was a broader criminal conspiracy. Edmund Frost stood up, his imposing 6-foot frame casting shadows across his pristine desk. His short-sleeved white dress shirt revealed pale arms that had never seen manual labor, and his perfectly styled gray hair spoke of expensive salon treatments. "You defended Terrence Brooks last week when he complained about some harmless jokes," he said, his voice rising with indignation. "That's not team behavior, Nora. That's troublemaking." Agent Nora Callahan remembered that incident vividly. Terrence Brooks, one of only 3 black software developers in the entire company, had been subjected to a barrage of racist jokes during a team meeting. When white colleagues started making comments about his hair, his neighborhood, and his supposed lack of education despite his MIT degree, Agent Nora Callahan had spoken up. She'd calmly pointed out that such comments were inappropriate and potentially discriminatory. Edmund Frost's reaction had been swift and telling. Instead of addressing the racist behavior, he'd pulled Agent Nora Callahan aside and warned her about being too sensitive. He'd suggested she needed to develop thicker skin if she wanted to succeed in corporate America. The hidden recording device had captured that conversation too, along with his comment that diversity hires needed to be grateful for their opportunities instead of constantly complaining. Over 6 months, Agent Nora Callahan had witnessed Edmund Frost's systematic campaign against employees of color. Rosa Delgado, a brilliant Latina engineer with dual degrees from Stanford, had been terminated for alleged communication problems after reporting sexual harassment from a white supervisor. Her replacement was a white male with half her experience and none of her credentials. Linda Nguyen, an Asian American data analyst, had been repeatedly passed over for promotions despite consistently excellent performance reviews. During one staff meeting, Agent Nora Callahan had watched Edmund Frost explain to his leadership team that they needed to be careful about promoting too many minorities too quickly, claiming it would create resentment among their core employees. The financial irregularities had been equally damning. Agent Nora Callahan's access to company databases revealed that Frost Technologies was submitting false diversity reports to federal agencies. They claimed minority hiring percentages that were complete fabrications, allowing them to secure government contracts worth millions of dollars. Meanwhile, black-owned suppliers were systematically excluded from vendor relationships, and the company's internal lending programs consistently denied assistance to employees of color. "You're a disruptor," Edmund continued, his face reddening with anger. "You question authority. You make other employees uncomfortable with your constant focus on race. And frankly, you're not the cultural fit we thought you'd be when we gave you this opportunity." The irony of a white CEO lecturing a black woman about focusing too much on race wasn't lost on Agent Nora Callahan, and she knew the recording would be devastating evidence in federal court. She maintained her professional demeanor, knowing that any emotional response would only fuel his narrative about her supposed attitude problem. Instead, she simply nodded and asked about her final paycheck and benefits continuation. Her calm professionalism seemed to irritate Edmund even more, as if he'd expected her to break down or beg for her job. "Security will escort you out," he said dismissively, pressing a button on his desk phone. "I don't want any scenes or dramatics. Just pack your personal items and leave quietly." As two security guards appeared in the doorway, Agent Nora Callahan realized this was exactly how Edmund Frost had disposed of dozens of other employees of color over the years. The cold, clinical efficiency of institutionalized discrimination disguised as corporate decision-making. The walk to her desk felt surreal. Coworkers pretended not to watch as she gathered her few personal belongings, but Agent Nora Callahan could feel their eyes tracking her movements. Some looked genuinely sympathetic, particularly those who had witnessed the racist incidents she'd tried to address. Others seemed relieved that the troublemaker was finally being removed. Terrence Brooks approached her desk as she packed, his expression pained with guilt. "I'm sorry this happened because you defended me," he whispered, glancing nervously toward Edmund Frost's office. Agent Nora Callahan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, knowing she couldn't reveal that his vindication was coming soon. "Everything happens for a reason," she said quietly, her words carrying deeper meaning than he could possibly understand. The security escort through the lobby was designed to maximize humiliation. Edmund Frost watched from his corner office window as Agent Nora Callahan walked toward the exit, his satisfied smirk visible even from a distance. He probably thought this was another successful elimination of a problematic minority employee, another demonstration of his power to control the workplace culture through fear and retaliation. As the glass doors of Frost Technologies closed behind her, Agent Nora Callahan felt a mixture of emotions coursing through her system. The professional satisfaction of a mission accomplished warred with genuine anger at the injustices she'd witnessed. Terrence Brooks would continue facing harassment. Rosa Delgado was still struggling to find new employment after being blacklisted, and Linda Nguyen remained trapped in a hostile work environment. But their suffering hadn't been in vain. Every discriminatory comment, every biased decision, every falsified report had been meticulously documented by a trained federal agent with access to company systems and executive conversations. Edmund Frost's casual racism and systematic discrimination were about to face the full weight of federal prosecution. Agent Nora Callahan reached her car, a modest sedan that fit her cover identity perfectly. Once inside with the doors locked, she reached into her purse and retrieved a secure satellite phone that looked like an ordinary smartphone. Her fingers moved quickly across the encrypted keypad, dialing a number she'd memorized but never called from this location. Detective Aaron Holt answered on the first ring, his familiar voice providing immediate comfort after 6 months of isolation. The connection crackled with secure encryption as she delivered the words they'd both been waiting to hear. "Phase 1 complete," she said, allowing herself the first genuine smile she'd worn in months. "We have everything we need." The tiny cameras hidden throughout the office building had captured Edmund Frost's termination speech in perfect detail, while her recording devices had preserved every discriminatory word for federal prosecutors. As Agent Nora Callahan drove away from Frost Technologies for the final time, She allowed herself to imagine Edmund Frost's face when federal agents would soon arrive with search warrants and arrest warrants. The man who had just humiliated her for being a diversity hire with an attitude problem was about to discover that his real problem was far more serious than he could possibly imagine. The trap had been set, the evidence gathered, and justice was finally coming for Edmund Frost and his empire of discrimination. Agent Nora Callahan's 6 months of careful documentation were about to transform from corporate humiliation into federal prosecution, and the shock on Edmund Frost's face would make every moment of undercover work worthwhile. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the FBI field office, casting sharp rectangles of light across the polished concrete floor. Agent Nora Callahan sat at the conference table, her red blouse crisp and professional, dark jeans pressed to perfection. 6 months of carefully constructed evidence lay spread before her like pieces of an intricate puzzle, each document telling part of a larger damning story. Detective Aaron Holt entered the room carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, his muscular frame filling out his green button-down shirt and dark slacks. The overhead fluorescent lights illuminated the determination etched into his features as he set down the cups and took his seat across from Agent Nora Callahan. "Let's start from the beginning," Detective Aaron Holt said, opening the first manila folder. 6 months of documentation. Tell me what patterns emerged during your undercover operation. Agent Nora Callahan lifted the first set of personnel files, her movements precise and methodical. Edmund Frost's discrimination isn't random or emotional. It's systematic, calculated, and deliberate. Every decision follows the same pattern, designed to maintain plausible deniability while achieving consistently racist outcomes. She spread 3 employee evaluation forms across the table. Look at these performance reviews. Terrence Brooks, black software developer with a master's degree from MIT, consistently rated NEET's expectations despite exceeding every measurable performance metric. Meanwhile, Jason Williams, white developer with half Terrence's qualifications, receives exceeds expectations ratings for identical work quality. Detective Aaron Holt studied the documents, his jaw tightening. The numerical scores tell a different story than the written evaluations. Exactly. Edmund Frost personally reviews every evaluation before submission to human resources. I watched him change ratings, lower scores, and insert subtle negative language specifically for black employees. He's careful never to use explicitly racial terms, but the pattern is undeniable when you examine the data collectively. Agent Nora Callahan pulled out a thick folder labeled Termination Records. This is where the systematic nature becomes most apparent. Over the past 3 years, Frost Technologies terminated 17 black employees. Compare that to 2 white employees terminated during the same period, despite similar performance issues and disciplinary infractions. She opened to a specific case file. Rosa Delgado, Latina software engineer, fired for communication issues after reporting sexual harassment by her supervisor. Her performance reviews were exemplary until the day she filed the complaint. Suddenly, she was documented for attitude problems and difficulty collaborating with team members. Detective Aaron Holt shook his head, anger building in his voice. Let me guess, the supervisor who harassed her faced no consequences. Promoted to senior management 2 months later. I have recordings of Edmund Frost joking about Rosa's complaint, calling her another diversity hire playing victim. He personally approved her termination while dismissing her harassment allegations without investigation. Agent Nora Callahan's professional composure remained intact, but her eyes flashed with controlled fury. Terrence Brooks provides another perfect example. After questioning racist jokes in a team meeting, he was suddenly subjected to increased scrutiny. His project deadlines were moved up without notice. His access to resources was restricted, and when he missed an impossible deadline, Edmund Frost used it as justification for demotion. She pulled out audio transcription pages. I recorded Edmund Frost's conversation with the team lead. Quote, "These people always want to make everything about race. Maybe if Terrence focused more on coding and less on political correctness, he'd meet his deadlines." Detective Aaron Holt reviewed the hiring records Agent Nora Callahan placed before him. These statistics are damning. In 6 months, How many qualified black candidates were passed over? 37. I documented every interview process, every decision meeting. Black candidates with superior qualifications systematically rejected, while less qualified white candidates received offers. The excuses varied, but the outcome remained constant. Agent Nora Callahan opened her laptop, displaying a spreadsheet with dozens of entries. I created detailed profiles comparing qualifications. Marcus Johnson, black candidate with 15 years experience and relevant certifications, rejected for cultural fit concerns. Meanwhile, Brad Mitchell, white candidate with 8 years experience and no certifications, hired the same week for identical position. What reasons did Edmund Frost give for these decisions? He's perfected the art of coded language. Black candidates are always not quite right for the team dynamic, or have communication styles that don't align with company culture. White candidates are consistently described as bringing fresh perspective or having strong leadership potential, even when their qualifications are demonstrably inferior. Detective Aaron Holt leaned back in his chair, the scope of the discrimination becoming clear. This isn't just individual bias. This is institutional racism designed to maintain white supremacy in the workplace. Agent Nora Callahan nodded, pulling out financial documents. The discrimination extends beyond hiring and firing. Black employees receive smaller salary increases, are passed over for high-visibility projects, and face barriers to professional development opportunities that are freely offered to white colleagues. She pointed to compensation data. Linda Nguyen, Asian American data analyst, makes $18,000 less than her white male counterpart, despite identical responsibilities and superior performance metrics. When she requested salary adjustment, Edmund Frost denied the request, claiming budget constraints. The same week, he approved a $25,000 raise for a white employee with worse performance ratings. Detective Aaron Holt studied the evidence with growing satisfaction at its thoroughness. Your documentation is comprehensive. 6 months of systematic evidence gathering. But tell me about the government contract fraud. How does that connect to the discrimination? Agent Nora Callahan's eyes brightened with anticipation for the next phase of their investigation. That's where Edmund Frost's criminal enterprise becomes most apparent. Frost Technologies holds 12 federal contracts worth over $50 million, all obtained by submitting falsified diversity reports. She opened a folder containing official government forms. Federal contracts require documentation of good faith efforts to promote diversity and inclusion. Edmund Frost personally signed reports claiming Frost Technologies actively recruits minority candidates, maintains inclusive workplace culture, and supports minority-owned supplier businesses, while simultaneously maintaining discriminatory practices. Worse than that, I discovered he created fake diversity initiatives that exist only on paper. The minority mentorship program listed in federal reports never actually operated. The inclusive leadership training consists of a single online module that employees complete in 10 minutes without any meaningful content about bias or discrimination. Agent Nora Callahan pulled out supplier contracts. The federal reports claim 15% minority-owned supplier relationships. In reality, that percentage includes one catering company owned by a black woman who provides coffee service twice per month. Every major supplier contract goes to white-owned businesses, often selected over more competitive minority-owned alternatives. Detective Aaron Holt examined the documentation with professional appreciation. This establishes mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges, in addition to civil rights violations. Edmund Frost knowingly submitted false information to federal agencies to obtain contracts his company wouldn't qualify for under honest diversity reporting. He's stealing taxpayer money while actively discriminating against the very communities those diversity requirements are designed to protect. Agent Nora Callahan organized the evidence into neat stacks, her movements reflecting months of meticulous preparation. I recorded conversations where Edmund Frost explicitly discusses gaming the federal contract system. Quote, "These government diversity quotas are nothing but political theater. We tell them what they want to hear, collect our contracts, and run our business the way business should be run." He actually said that multiple times, in various forms. He views civil rights laws as obstacles to circumvent rather than legal requirements to follow. His contempt for federal oversight is matched only by his racism toward employees and candidates. Detective Aaron Holt gathered the personnel files, his expression reflecting the weight of systematic injustice they'd uncovered. How many total victims are we looking at? Direct employment discrimination affects approximately 40 individuals over 3 years. Contract fraud impacts every taxpayer funding federal programs designed to promote diversity. But the broader community impact extends much further. Agent Nora Callahan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Edmund Frost's discriminatory practices create ripple effects throughout the local economy. Black professionals denied opportunities at Frost Technologies struggle to find comparable positions elsewhere. Families face financial hardship, children's educational opportunities suffer, and entire communities bear the economic cost of systematic exclusion. She returned to her seat, her voice carrying renewed determination. Rosa Delgado now works 3 part-time jobs to support her children after being blacklisted in the tech industry. Terrence Brooks faces potential foreclosure because his demotion eliminated his ability to meet mortgage payments. These aren't just employment statistics, these are destroyed lives and damaged families. Detective Aaron Holt reviewed the audio transcription logs. Your undercover work captured the corporate culture that enables this discrimination. Edmund Frost sets the tone from the top. Racist jokes in executive meetings, casual use of racial stereotypes in performance discussions, and explicit statements about maintaining company standards that clearly refer to keeping the workforce predominantly white. Agent Nora Callahan opened her final folder. I documented dozens of instances where Edmund Frost's leadership team engaged in discriminatory conversations. They're comfortable expressing racist views because they believe they're in a safe space among like-minded individuals. They had no idea they were creating evidence for a federal investigation. Edmund Frost's arrogance worked in our favor. He's so confident in his power and convinced of his righteousness that he never considered the possibility of accountability. Every discriminatory decision was made openly, documented thoroughly, and discussed without concern for legal consequences. Detective Aaron Holt closed the last file folder, his expression reflecting satisfaction at the investigation's thoroughness. 6 months of systematic evidence gathering. This case will set precedents for federal civil rights enforcement. Agent Nora Callahan smiled for the first time during their review, anticipation building for the next phase of their operation. Edmund Frost fired me thinking he was eliminating a problem employee. Instead, he triggered the final phase of a federal investigation that will destroy everything he's built through decades of discrimination and fraud. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. Phase 2 begins now. Time to expand the investigation and start building cases against his co-conspirators. Edmund Frost isn't operating alone, and we're going to expose everyone involved in maintaining this system of discrimination and fraud. The morning sun climbed higher outside the FBI field office windows, illuminating Agent Nora Callahan and Detective Aaron Holt as they prepared to advance their methodical pursuit of justice against systematic racism and corruption. The fluorescent lights in the FBI field office cast sharp shadows across Detective Aaron Holt's desk as he spread financial documents across the polished surface. Agent Nora Callahan adjusted her green blouse and leaned forward, her trained eyes scanning the maze of corporate transactions that revealed Edmund Frost's true empire of discrimination. Look at this pattern, Detective Aaron Holt said, his muscular frame tense with focused energy as he pointed to a series of bank transfers. Edmund Frost's been making regular payments to Victor Caldwell's campaign fund for 3 years, always just under the reporting threshold. Agent Nora Callahan traced the financial trail with her finger, connecting dots that painted a disturbing picture of systematic corruption. City Councilman Victor Caldwell had voted consistently to relax hiring oversight for companies with government contracts, specifically benefiting Frost Technologies while undermining diversity requirements that protected workers like her. The morning sunlight streaming through the office windows illuminated documents that would change everything. Victor Caldwell's voting record aligned perfectly with Edmund Frost's business interests, creating a web of political protection that had allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked for years. There's more, Detective Aaron Holt continued, pulling out a thick folder marked with federal classification stamps. "Diane Prescott contacted us 2 days ago. She's ready to talk." Diane Prescott arrived at the field office wearing a red blazer and black slacks, her hands trembling slightly as she settled into the interview chair. Her weathered face showed the strain of someone carrying a dangerous secret, but her eyes held the determination of someone finally ready to speak truth to power. "I've been Edmund Frost's accountant for 12 years, Diane Prescott began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "What I've seen will make you sick. He doesn't just discriminate in hiring. He's been systematically defrauding the federal government while destroying lives." Agent Nora Callahan activated the recording equipment, knowing this testimony would become the cornerstone of their expanding investigation. Diane Prescott's insider knowledge represented the breakthrough they needed to transform workplace discrimination charges into federal racketeering cases. "Edmund Frost ordered me to falsify diversity reports submitted to federal agencies," Diane Prescott continued, producing a stack of documents from her briefcase. "We claimed 40% minority employment when the actual number was less than 15%. He told me these government quotas are destroying American business, and that real Americans shouldn't have to compete with affirmative action hires." The methodical building of their case took on new dimensions as Diane Prescott revealed financial crimes worth millions of dollars. Federal contracts secured through fraudulent diversity certifications had funded Edmund Frost's discriminatory empire, while taxpayer money intended to support equal opportunity instead subsidized systematic racism. Detective Aaron Holt's jaw tightened as Diane Prescott explained how Edmund Frost deliberately excluded black-owned suppliers and contractors despite federal requirements for minority business participation. Purchase orders were manipulated, bids from black-owned companies mysteriously disappeared, and subcontracting arrangements were structured to avoid diversity requirements entirely. "He has a whole system," Diane Prescott said, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "Shell companies owned by his white friends submit bids, then Edmund Frost awards contracts at inflated prices. The money gets kicked back through political donations and personal payments. Meanwhile, legitimate black-owned businesses never get a fair chance." Agent Nora Callahan felt disgust rising in her chest as the true depth of Edmund Frost's corruption became clear. Her 6 months of undercover work had documented workplace discrimination, but this financial conspiracy represented a criminal enterprise that had stolen opportunities from entire communities while enriching those who perpetuated racial inequality. The investigation expanded beyond employment practices as Diane Prescott revealed Edmund Frost's discriminatory lending through the company credit union. Black employees were routinely denied loans that white employees with identical credit profiles received automatically. Families seeking mortgages, car loans, and emergency credit faced systematic barriers designed to maintain economic inequality. "The housing assistance program was the worst," Diane Prescott said, her red blazer catching the overhead fluorescent light as she leaned forward. "Edmund Frost personally reviews every application. Black families get rejected for reasons that don't apply to white families. Children's education, family stability, economic mobility, all sacrificed to maintain his vision of corporate culture." Detective Aaron Holt coordinated with federal prosecutors as the scope of charges expanded to encompass racketeering, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The RICO case they were building would encompass years of systematic criminal activity that used corporate resources and government contracts to perpetuate racial discrimination while generating illegal profits. Agent Nora Callahan's undercover recordings captured Edmund Frost's private conversations that revealed explicit racial hatred beneath his public persona of corporate respectability. His voice expressing contempt for federal anti-discrimination laws and his belief that diversity requirements threatened what he called real American values would provide devastating evidence of criminal intent. He said the Civil Rights Act was the beginning of America's decline, Agent Nora Callahan reported, playing back one of her most damning recordings. "Edmund Frost believes successful white men like him have a duty to resist what he calls the minority takeover of American business. Every discriminatory action was deliberate, calculated, and motivated by racial hatred. The pattern extended into community impact, as their investigation revealed how Edmund Frost's influence shaped local economic development. City contracts, influenced by Victor Caldwell's votes, consistently excluded black-owned businesses from construction projects, service contracts, and professional opportunities that would have built generational wealth in underserved communities. Hope emerged as allies stepped forward to support their expanding investigation. Diane Prescott's courage in becoming a whistleblower inspired other employees to provide evidence they had been too frightened to reveal. Internal emails, recorded conversations, and financial documents created an overwhelming case against Edmund Frost's criminal enterprise. Detective Aaron Holt received authorization to coordinate with multiple federal agencies as the investigation revealed connections to housing discrimination, banking violations, and tax evasion. Edmund Frost's systematic corruption had created a criminal organization that violated numerous federal laws while destroying lives and communities through institutionalized racism. "We have him," Agent Nora Callahan said, reviewing the evidence that would soon bring down Edmund Frost's empire. 6 months of undercover work, financial records, witness testimony, and recorded confessions. This case will set precedents for how federal law enforcement addresses corporate discrimination. Across the city, Gabriela Morales sat in her newsroom office, wearing a red blouse and black pants, reviewing anonymous tips that had begun arriving about Frost Technologies. The investigative journalist's years of experience covering corporate malfeasance had prepared her to recognize the signs of a major story developing. The first anonymous email contained personnel records showing patterns of discriminatory hiring and termination. The second included financial documents suggesting fraudulent reporting to federal agencies. The third contained recordings of executive conversations that would shock the public and galvanize community action. Gabriela Morales began verifying information that would expose Frost Technologies' systematic discrimination to public scrutiny. Her investigation would create the media pressure necessary to ensure federal prosecutors pursued maximum penalties while educating the community about how corporate racism operated in modern America. Strategic anticipation filled the FBI field office as Detective Aaron Holt and Agent Nora Callahan prepared for the next phase of their operation. Federal arrest warrants were being prepared, asset seizure orders were being drafted, and victim notification procedures were being coordinated. The web of corruption surrounding Edmund Frost extended beyond individual prejudice into systematic criminal activity that had operated for years with impunity. Political protection purchased through Victor Caldwell's influence, financial crimes hidden through manipulated accounting, and discriminatory practices defended through legal intimidation were about to face federal prosecution. Agent Nora Callahan reflected on how her termination for having an attitude problem had triggered the final phase of an investigation that would transform corporate accountability. Edmund Frost's casual racism and confident impunity were about to collide with federal law enforcement's commitment to civil rights protection. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was airtight, and justice was finally within reach. Edmund Frost's empire of discrimination and corruption would soon face the full weight of federal prosecution, while his victims would see their courage vindicated through systematic legal accountability. As afternoon sunlight filled the FBI field office, Agent Nora Callahan and Detective Aaron Holt prepared to close the trap that would end Edmund Frost's criminal enterprise forever. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Terrence Brooks's modest 2-story home as he sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by a fortress of overdue bills and foreclosure notices. His green polo shirt hung loose on his frame, evidence of the weight he'd lost since his demotion 3 weeks ago. The blue jeans he wore were his weekend clothes now, no longer needing professional attire for his reduced position at Frost Technologies. "Daddy, why do you look so sad?" His 8-year-old daughter Maya climbed onto his lap, her small fingers tracing the worry lines that had deepened around his eyes. Terrence forced a smile, kissing the top of her head. "Just working on some grown-up stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But there was everything to worry about. The mortgage payment was 2 months behind. His salary cut from the demotion meant they were barely covering utilities and groceries. His wife Jennifer had taken a second job at the local grocery store, working nights after her day shift as a nurse. The American dream they'd built was crumbling, brick by brick, because he dared to speak up about racist jokes in team meetings. Across town, Rosa Delgado adjusted her red uniform shirt, and checked her reflection in the employee bathroom mirror of the fast food restaurant where she worked her third job of the day. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows under her eyes, highlighting the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Her engineering degree hung framed in her apartment, a bitter reminder of the career Edmund Frost had destroyed with a single phone call to industry contacts. Rosa, table 6 needs cleaning, called her supervisor, a teenager who made her feel the full weight of her fall from grace. She nodded, grabbing the cleaning supplies. 6 months ago, she'd been designing software architecture for government contracts. Now she was scrubbing tables for minimum wage, trying to feed her 2 children and keep them from understanding why mommy couldn't afford their after-school programs anymore. The humiliation burned worse than the physical exhaustion. Her son Carlos had asked why they couldn't go to McDonald's anymore, why they ate rice and beans every night. How could she explain that speaking up about sexual harassment had branded her as a troublemaker in the tech industry, that Edmund Frost's network of influence had poisoned her reputation before she could even apply for new positions? Meanwhile, Linda Nguyen sat in her car in the Frost Technologies parking lot, hands trembling as she stared at the building where she'd witnessed so much injustice. Her red blouse was wrinkled from nervous fidgeting, her usual professional composure cracking under the weight of her silence. She'd kept quiet for 3 years, watching Edmund Frost's racist tirades behind closed doors, seeing qualified black colleagues passed over for promotions, terminated for infractions that white employees committed without consequence. The guilt was eating her alive. When Terrence Brooks was demoted, she'd wanted to speak up, to tell HR what she'd witnessed. But Edmund Frost's warning to employees about loyalty and discretion echoed in her mind. She had a family to support, elderly parents depending on her income. Speaking up felt like professional suicide, but staying silent felt like moral death. Agent Nora Callahan, maintaining her cover as the recently terminated troublemaker, arranged to meet with each victim privately. The coffee shop where she sat with Rosa Delgado buzzed with afternoon activity, the natural light from large windows providing perfect illumination for the hidden camera, recording their conversation. "I keep thinking about what you said at the meeting," Rosa whispered, glancing around nervously. "About documenting everything. I wish I'd listened sooner." "It's not too late," Agent Nora replied, her green sweater chosen deliberately to project calm authority. "You still have your termination paperwork, the emails, the performance reviews that suddenly became negative after you filed your complaint." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "My kids ask why we had to move to a smaller apartment, why I'm never home anymore. Carlos is acting out at school, and I can't afford the counseling he needs. Edmund Frost didn't just fire me, he destroyed my family's future." Agent Nora reached across the table, squeezing Rosa's hand. "Help me make sure he can't do this to anyone else." That evening, the basement of Mount Olive Baptist Church filled with the soft murmur of dozens of conversations as current and former Frost Technologies employees gathered for what organizers called a community support meeting. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a bright, honest glow over faces marked by frustration, fear, and growing determination. Reverend Johnson, a distinguished man in his 70s wearing a blue jacket over his white collar, opened the meeting with a prayer for justice and healing. "We gather tonight, not in hatred, but in truth, not for revenge, but for righteousness." Terrence Brooks stood first, his voice shaking as he addressed the crowd. "3 weeks ago, I was a senior software developer with 10 years at Frost Technologies. Today, I'm facing foreclosure because I asked my manager to stop telling racist jokes during team meetings." The crowd murmured in sympathy and recognition. Similar stories followed, each one painting a clearer picture of systematic oppression. "I was told my natural hair was unprofessional," shared Angela Washington, a young accountant. "When I filed a complaint with HR, suddenly my work performance became unsatisfactory. They promoted 3 white men with less experience over me," added Marcus Thompson, his orange shirt bright under the church lights. "When I questioned it, they said I had an attitude problem." Agent Nora Callahan sat in the back, ostensibly there as another victim, but actually documenting every testimony for the federal case. Her hidden recording device captured not just the words, but the raw emotion, the community pain that Edmund Frost's discrimination had inflicted. Detective Aaron Holt worked late in his FBI field office, coordinating victim interviews while building the criminal case. His muscular frame was evident even in his standard-issue blue suit as he reviewed financial records showing the full scope of Edmund Frost's retaliation campaigns. He's not just firing them, Detective Aaron explained to his supervisor. He's systematically destroying their ability to find work elsewhere. Phone calls to industry contacts, false references, even threatening to sue former employees for corporate espionage if they apply to competitors. The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Frost Technologies had a network of influence that extended far beyond their own company, effectively blacklisting any employee who dared to challenge discriminatory practices. At Frost Technologies headquarters, Diane Prescott sat alone in her accounting department office, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as she reviewed the falsified diversity reports one more time. Her red cardigan hung over her blue office chair, and her hands shook as she considered the implications of what she was about to do. The anonymous note left on her car windshield that morning had been clear. Keep your mouth shut about company business, or join the unemployment line with your colored friends. Edmund Frost was escalating his intimidation tactics. But Diane had spent 20 years building her reputation as an ethical accountant. She'd raised 3 daughters to stand up for what was right. The thought of remaining silent while families like Terrence Brooks's lost their homes made her physically sick. She opened her secure email and began typing. Detective Holt, I'm ready to provide testimony about the falsified federal reports. I have copies of everything. The local NAACP chapter had been monitoring the situation at Frost Technologies for months, but Reverend Johnson's phone call about the church meeting galvanized them into action. Chapter President Dr. Sarah Williams, a retired professor wearing a red blazer that commanded attention, called an emergency meeting of the executive board. We're organizing a comprehensive boycott of Frost Technologies and all their subsidiary companies, she announced to the packed room. No more contracts, no more purchases, no more silence while they destroy our community's economic foundation. The boycott gained momentum quickly. Word spread through social media, church networks, and community organizations. Local businesses began canceling contracts with Frost Technologies. City council members faced pressure to review government partnerships with the company. Edmund Frost felt the walls closing in from every direction. His paranoia reached new heights as he stalked the halls of his company, his expensive suit wrinkled from stress, his usual confident demeanor replaced by manic suspicion. He called remaining black employees into his office one by one, his voice alternating between fake friendliness and barely contained threats. I hope you understand that loyalty to this company is rewarded, he told Kevin Martinez, one of the few black engineers who hadn't been terminated yet. And disloyalty has consequences. Kevin sat stiffly in the chair, his orange polo shirt damp with nervous sweat, as Edmund Frost's barely veiled threats filled the air. The message was clear: stay silent or join the growing list of terminated employees. But Kevin had already made his choice. The recording app on his phone captured every threatening word. As the sun set over the city, Agent Nora Callahan compiled the day's intelligence in her secure apartment. The community's pain was palpable, documented in hours of testimony and evidence. Families were struggling to survive, careers lay in ruins, and children were suffering because their parents had dared to expect equal treatment. But something else was emerging from the trauma. Community solidarity, stronger than Edmund Frost's intimidation tactics. The church meeting had transformed individual victims into a collective force for justice. The NAACP boycott was gaining national attention. Whistleblowers like Diane Prescott were finding courage in numbers. Detective Aaron Holt reviewed the day's victim interviews, each testimony adding another layer to their federal case. The human cost of discrimination was staggering, but so was the evidence of systematic civil rights violations. Edmund Frost's desperate attempts to silence victims were only providing more proof of his criminal intent. The investigation was entering its final phase, but the community impact would last much longer. Families were struggling to rebuild their lives, while Edmund Frost continued his campaign of economic terrorism against anyone who challenged his discriminatory empire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new testimonies, and new evidence of crimes that demanded federal prosecution. But tonight, in churches and community centers across the city, people who had been isolated by discrimination were finding strength in unity, preparing to ensure that Edmund Frost's reign of terror finally came to an end. The trap was closing, but the real victory would come when families like Terrence Brooks's could rebuild their shattered dreams, when professionals like Rosa Delgado could reclaim their careers, and when future employees would never again face the systematic discrimination that had poisoned Frost Technologies for far too long. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the federal building's 23rd floor, casting sharp geometric patterns across the polished conference table where Agent Nora Callahan spread out 6 months of meticulous evidence. Her red blouse caught the natural skylight as she leaned forward, studying the arrest warrants that would soon dismantle Edmund Frost's empire of discrimination. Detective Aaron Holt adjusted his green top and blue jacket, his muscular frame tense with anticipation as he coordinated final details with the U.S. Attorney's Office. 214 hours of recorded conversations, Agent Nora Callahan announced, her voice carrying strategic satisfaction as she watched federal prosecutors review the evidence. Every racist joke, every discriminatory decision, every explicit instruction to exclude black candidates. Edmund Frost handed us everything we needed. The federal task force had grown to 12 agents, each specializing in different aspects of the sprawling criminal enterprise. Financial crimes investigators pored over falsified diversity reports that secured millions in government contracts. Civil rights prosecutors cataloged systematic discrimination affecting dozens of employees. RICO specialists traced the conspiracy network connecting Edmund Frost to City Councilman Victor Caldwell and 3 company executives who actively participated in the discriminatory schemes. Detective Aaron Holt pointed to surveillance photos showing Edmund Frost meeting with Victor Caldwell at an exclusive country club. These conversations proved direct coordination between corporate discrimination and political corruption. Victor Caldwell received campaign donations in exchange for helping Edmund Frost avoid federal oversight. Agent Nora Callahan felt the familiar surge of determination as she recalled Edmund Frost's words during her termination meeting. The man who dismissed her as a diversity hire with an attitude problem had no idea he was confessing his crimes to a federal agent wearing a concealed recording device. Every condescending comment, every racist assumption, every illegal instruction to his subordinates had been captured with crystal clarity. The evidence room contained boxes of discriminatory emails that Edmund Frost believed were secure on company servers. His private communications revealed a pattern of racial hatred spanning decades, from early career messages mocking black colleagues to recent instructions ordering human resources to find pretexts for terminating black employees who complained about workplace harassment. Gabriela Morales is ready to publish tomorrow morning, Detective Aaron Holt announced, checking his secure phone. The investigative journalist had spent weeks verifying leaked information, building an explosive exposé that would trigger public outrage and media scrutiny. Her series would detail systematic discrimination, financial fraud, and political corruption while protecting the ongoing federal investigation. Agent Nora Callahan reviewed the timing of coordinated arrests designed for maximum impact. Edmund Frost would be taken into custody during a board meeting where he planned to announce new diversity initiatives intended to deflect growing suspicions. Victor Caldwell would be arrested at City Hall while presiding over a public hearing on minority business development. The irony was deliberate and devastating. The federal building hummed with focused energy as agents prepared for raids on Frost Technologies' main headquarters, satellite offices, and Edmund Frost's private residence. Evidence teams would seize computers, financial records, and communication devices while preventing destruction of critical documents. Agent Nora Callahan had provided detailed floor plans and security protocols gathered during her undercover assignment. Her thoughts turned to Terrence Brooks, Rosa Delgado, and the other victims whose lives had been shattered by Edmund Frost's systematic discrimination. The software developer faced foreclosure after his demotion, while the fired Latina engineer struggled to support her children on part-time wages. Their pain had motivated Agent Nora Callahan through months of enduring casual racism and documenting criminal behavior. Detective Aaron Holt coordinated with the Securities and Exchange Commission to monitor Frost Technologies' stock price as media coverage triggered investor panic. Government contractors were already suspending relationships pending investigation results, creating financial pressure that would accelerate the company's collapse. Edmund Frost's attempts to maintain business as usual were failing spectacularly. The building tension was palpable as Agent Nora Callahan prepared her equipment for the final confrontation. Hidden cameras and recording devices had captured Edmund Frost's discriminatory statements, but tomorrow she would face him directly as a federal agent with arrest warrants and criminal charges. The satisfaction of revealing her true identity to the man who had dismissed her with racist contempt would mark the culmination of systematic justice. Diane Prescott, the company accountant turned whistleblower, had provided financial records proving Edmund Frost personally ordered falsification of diversity reports submitted to federal agencies. Her testimony would demonstrate direct knowledge and intent to defraud the government while excluding minority-owned businesses from lucrative contracts. Despite facing retaliation threats, she remained committed to exposing the criminal conspiracy. Agent Nora Callahan studied surveillance footage showing Edmund Frost's increasingly desperate behavior. As media pressure intensified, he had threatened whistleblowers, attempted to delete electronic evidence, and pressured remaining employees to sign false statements defending company culture. Each desperate action provided additional charges of obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. The excitement for justice was building as federal prosecutors finalized plea negotiations with lower-level executives willing to testify against Edmund Frost in exchange for reduced sentences. His inner circle was fracturing under federal pressure, with former loyalists now cooperating with investigators to avoid lengthy prison terms. Victor Caldwell's attempts to distance himself from Edmund Frost were pathetically transparent. Recorded conversations proved his direct involvement in discriminatory schemes, from blocking federal oversight to facilitating discriminatory hiring practices in exchange for political donations. His protests of ignorance were contradicted by his own voice explicitly discussing racial exclusion as campaign strategy. Agent Nora Callahan reviewed the psychological profile developed by federal behavioral analysts. Edmund Frost exhibited classic patterns of narcissistic entitlement combined with deep-seated racial prejudice. His belief in white superiority had created blind spots that made him vulnerable to undercover investigation. The same arrogance that enabled decades of discrimination had ultimately facilitated his downfall. Detective Aaron Holt checked his watch, noting the precise timing required for coordinated raids across multiple locations. Federal agents in unmarked vehicles were positioning themselves outside Frost Technologies facilities, waiting for synchronized commands that would prevent evidence destruction and ensure comprehensive evidence seizure. The natural skylight illuminated Agent Nora Callahan's determined expression as she contemplated tomorrow's revelation. Edmund Frost would experience the same shock and humiliation he had inflicted on countless black employees over his career. The power dynamic would reverse completely as she displayed federal credentials and read criminal charges that would destroy everything he had built through discrimination and corruption. Building anticipation filled the conference room as prosecutors outlined the broader implications of the case. Agent Nora Callahan's investigation would establish precedent for federal enforcement of workplace discrimination laws while demonstrating the effectiveness of long-term undercover operations in corporate environments. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Edmund Frost's own recorded words expressing racial hatred and contempt for federal anti-discrimination laws would convict him more effectively than any prosecutor's argument. His casual use of racial slurs during private conversations revealed the mindset driving systematic exclusion of black employees and contractors. Agent Nora Callahan felt focused resolve as she prepared to face the man who had underestimated her intelligence, determination, and federal authority. Tomorrow's confrontation would validate every moment of enduring his racist comments and discriminatory treatment. The diversity hire with an attitude problem would reveal herself as the federal agent who documented his crimes and built the case that would destroy his criminal enterprise. Detective Aaron Holt reviewed final security protocols as federal marshals prepared to transport multiple high-value suspects to detention facilities. Edmund Frost's arrest would be particularly dramatic, designed to send clear messages about federal commitment to civil rights enforcement and corporate accountability. The investigation had revealed systematic exclusion affecting hundreds of potential employees and dozens of minority-owned businesses. Edmund Frost's discrimination extended beyond individual hiring decisions to encompass broader economic exclusion that violated both civil rights laws and federal contracting regulations. Agent Nora Callahan checked her service weapon and federal credentials, preparing for the moment when she would enter Edmund Frost's executive suite as the leader of a federal raid rather than a terminated employee. The transformation would be complete and devastating to his worldview of racial superiority and corporate immunity. The excitement was building as teams prepared for coordinated execution of arrest warrants that would dismantle the entire criminal conspiracy. Edmund Frost's shock at Agent Nora Callahan's true identity would be captured by federal photographers, documenting one of the most significant civil rights investigations in recent history. Tomorrow's raids would mark the beginning of Edmund Frost's complete downfall. But tonight, Agent Nora Callahan reviewed every detail of the evidence that would convict him. The systematic documentation of his crimes represented months of careful work that would result in federal prison time and financial ruin. Detective Aaron Holt's coordination with media relations ensured that Edmund Frost's perp walk would receive maximum coverage, sending clear messages about consequences for corporate discrimination and federal contracting fraud. The visual impact would demonstrate justice being served while encouraging other victims to report similar crimes. Agent Nora Callahan felt the weight of responsibility as she prepared to reveal her identity and execute the arrests that would change dozens of lives. Terrence Brooks would see his tormentor in handcuffs, while Rosa Delgado would witness federal justice, validating her complaints about workplace harassment and discrimination. The trap was closing with mathematical precision, each element timed for maximum impact and comprehensive evidence seizure. Edmund Frost's empire, built on decades of discrimination and corruption, would collapse within hours as federal agents executed the most thorough civil rights investigation in the agency's recent history. Agent Nora Callahan stood at the windows overlooking the city where Edmund Frost believed himself untouchable, protected by wealth and political connections. Tomorrow he would discover that federal law enforcement possessed tools and determination that exceeded his ability to obstruct or intimidate. The final phase was beginning, and Agent Nora Callahan was ready to spring the trap that would deliver justice to every victim of Edmund Frost's systematic discrimination while establishing precedent for corporate accountability and civil rights enforcement. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Frost Technologies as federal agents positioned themselves around the glass and steel building. Agent Nora Callahan adjusted her green blazer and blue jacket, checking her weapon one final time before stepping out of the black SUV. After 6 months of enduring Edmund Frost's racist remarks and documenting his systematic discrimination, this moment felt like justice incarnate. Detective Aaron Holt's voice crackled through her earpiece. "All units in position. Target is confirmed in his office. Execute on your signal, Agent Callahan." She looked up at the executive floor, where Edmund Frost sat in his corner office, probably congratulating himself on firing another troublesome black employee. He had no idea that his diversity hire with an attitude problem was about to become his worst nightmare. "This is Agent Callahan. Execute, 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 execute." The coordinated raid began with military precision. FBI agents flooded through every entrance of Frost Technologies, while Agent Nora Callahan led her team directly to the executive elevator. Employees throughout the building watched in stunned silence as federal agents in tactical gear swept through departments, securing evidence and establishing perimeters. On the 20th floor, Agent Nora Callahan's heart pounded with anticipation as the elevator doors opened. She had walked these hallways for 6 months, enduring Edmund Frost's casual racism and systematic harassment. Now she returned with federal authority and arrest warrants. Edmund Frost's secretary looked up in confusion as Agent Nora Callahan approached the executive suite. "Ma'am, you can't be here. Security escorted you out yesterday," Mr. Frost specifically said, "Step aside, ma'am. FBI." Agent Nora Callahan displayed her credentials and badge. The secretary's face went pale as she realized the woman Edmund Frost had fired was not who she appeared to be. Agent Nora Callahan pushed open the mahogany doors to Edmund Frost's office. He sat behind his massive desk, reviewing financial reports with complete confidence. The morning light illuminated his perfectly groomed appearance and expensive suit, the picture of corporate power and privilege. "Mr. Frost, you have visitors?" his secretary called weakly from behind them. Edmund Frost looked up with irritation, expecting to see his security team removing an unwanted intruder. Instead, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally, absolute terror. The color drained from his face as he realized who stood before him. "Remember me, Mr. Frost? The diversity hire with the attitude problem?" Agent Nora Callahan stepped forward, her FBI credentials clearly visible. "Special Agent Nora Callahan, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're under arrest." Edmund Frost's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His hands gripped the arms of his leather chair as the full implications crashed over him. The woman he had systematically harassed and ultimately fired for defending other black employees was a federal agent. Detective Aaron Holt entered behind Agent Nora Callahan, flanked by 2 additional agents. His muscular frame filled his orange tactical vest as he approached Edmund Frost's desk. "Edmund Frost, you are under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government." "This is impossible," Edmund Frost stammered, finally finding his voice. "She was just an employee. A problematic employee with performance issues. This is some kind of mistake." Agent Nora Callahan pulled out a digital recorder, pressing play. Edmund Frost's voice filled the office. "These diversity quotas are destroying American business. I don't care what the government says. I'm not promoting unqualified people just because they're black. They should be grateful we hire them at all." Edmund Frost's face went ashen as he heard his own words played back to him. "Where did you get that?" "That was a private conversation." 6 months of private conversations, Mr. Frost. 6 months of documenting your systematic discrimination against black employees. 6 months of recording your racist tirades and criminal conspiracies. Agent Nora Callahan's voice carried the weight of every humiliation she had endured undercover. Every meeting where you used racial slurs. Every decision to pass over qualified black candidates. Every falsified diversity report you submitted to federal agencies. Detective Aaron Holt stepped forward with handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Wait. Edmund Frost stood desperately, knocking papers off his desk. "You don't understand. I never meant anything personally. It's just business. Sometimes tough decisions have to be made. Like firing Terrence Brooks for questioning racist jokes. Like demoting him when his performance reviews were outstanding. Like firing Rosa Delgado for reporting sexual harassment." Agent Nora Callahan counted off his crimes on her fingers. "Or maybe you mean the business of defrauding federal contracts by lying about your diversity statistics." Federal agents moved through Edmund Frost's office, systematically seizing computers, files, and recording equipment. Agent Nora Callahan watched with satisfaction as they dismantled the empire built on discrimination and corruption. The files in that cabinet contained performance reviews showing the systematic pattern. She directed the evidence team. His computer has emails coordinating with Victor Caldwell about maintaining discriminatory practices, and that safe behind the painting contains the original diversity reports before they were falsified. Edmund Frost's legs gave out as he sank back into his chair. The magnitude of the investigation became clear. This wasn't a random audit or complaint. This was a comprehensive federal operation that had penetrated the very heart of his organization. "How long?" he whispered. "How long were you watching?" 6 months of active investigation. But the FBI has been tracking your discriminatory patterns for over 2 years. We just needed someone on the inside to document your personal involvement. Agent Nora Callahan's voice carried professional satisfaction. "Congratulations, Mr. Frost. Your decision to fire me for defending Terrence Brooks just gave us the final evidence we needed to prove personal animus and systematic discrimination. Detective Aaron Holt approached with the handcuffs. "Turn around, Mr. Frost. Hands behind your back. Please. There has to be some way to resolve this. I have lawyers. I have influence. I contribute to political campaigns." Edmund Frost's voice cracked with desperation. "I can make changes. I can promote more minorities. I can make this right." The time for making things right was before you spent decades systematically destroying black careers and lives, Agent Nora Callahan said coldly. "Terrence Brooks lost his home because of your retaliation. Rosa Delgado's children went without Christmas presents because you blacklisted their mother. Linda Nguyen lived in fear because she witnessed your racism. Your actions have consequences, Mr. Frost." The handcuffs clicked into place as Detective Aaron Holt secured Edmund Frost's hands behind his back. The sound echoed through the office like a gavel of justice. "Edmund Frost, you are under federal arrest. You will be transported to federal holding pending arraignment. Your assets are subject to seizure pending resolution of criminal and civil proceedings." Throughout the building, Frost Technologies employees gathered at windows and in hallways, watching in amazement as their former CEO was led away in handcuffs. Many recognized Agent Nora Callahan as the woman who had been fired the day before for defending her coworkers. In the marketing department, Linda Nguyen covered her mouth in shock. "That's her. That's the woman who stood up to Frost yesterday. She's FBI." Word spread quickly through the building. The quiet woman who had worked in compliance for 6 months, who had defended Terrence Brooks and supported Rosa Delgado, who had been fired for having an attitude problem, was a federal agent conducting a civil rights investigation. As Agent Nora Callahan escorted Edmund Frost toward the elevator, she passed the cubicle where she had sat for 6 months. Her former coworkers stared in amazement, finally understanding why she had been so methodical in documenting every discriminatory incident. Agent Callahan called Marcus Williams, a young black analyst who had been passed over for promotion 3 times. "Thank you. Thank you for not letting them get away with it." She nodded professionally, but inside, her heart swelled with the knowledge that 6 months of enduring Edmund Frost's racism had finally paid off. Justice was being served. The elevator doors opened to reveal news crews already assembling in the lobby. Gabriela Morales, the investigative journalist who had been tracking the story, stood with her camera crew as federal agents led Edmund Frost through the perp walk. "Mr. Frost, Mr. Frost, do you have any comment on the federal charges against you?" Gabriela called out as camera flashes illuminated Edmund Frost's humiliated face. Edmund Frost kept his head down, unable to meet the eyes of employees who had watched him fire Agent Nora Callahan just 24 hours earlier, the same woman who now held his future in her hands. Outside the building, Victor Caldwell was simultaneously arrested at City Hall, his political career ending in handcuffs as Detective Aaron Holt's team executed coordinated raids across the city. At his modest apartment across town, Terrence Brooks sat with his family watching the morning news. His wife had called him when the breaking news alert appeared on her phone. Now they watched in stunned silence as the reporter detailed the federal raids. Federal agents arrested Frost Technologies CEO Edmund Frost this morning on charges of systematic civil rights violations, fraud, and racketeering. In a stunning development, we've learned that the investigation was led by FBI agent Nora Callahan, who spent 6 months working undercover at the company. Terrence Brooks's young daughter looked up from her cereal. "Daddy, isn't that the nice lady who defended you at work? The one who got fired yesterday?" Tears ran down Terrence's face as he nodded. "Yes, baby, that's her. And she wasn't really fired. She was fighting for us the whole time." His wife squeezed his hand as they watched Agent Nora Callahan lead Edmund Frost out in handcuffs. "She risked everything to get justice for you. For all of you." Rosa Delgado sat in her small kitchen, feeding her children breakfast before driving them to school and heading to her part-time cleaning job. When her phone buzzed with news alerts, she almost ignored it. Then she saw Edmund Frost's name. "Children, come look at this," she called, her voice shaking with emotion. "The man who fired Mommy is going to jail." Her oldest son, 8-year-old Miguel, read the headline slowly. FBI arrests racist boss for hurting workers? Yes. Mijo. And look who caught him. Rosa pointed to Agent Nora Callahan on screen. That's the woman who tried to help us, who stood up for us when nobody else would. As they watched the news coverage, Rosa felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The systematic destruction of her career might finally have consequences. Back at Frost Technologies, the board of directors convened an emergency meeting. As news of Edmund Frost's arrest spread through financial networks, stock prices plummeted as investors realized the full scope of the federal investigation. Board member Patricia Whitman addressed the crisis management team. We need to distance the company from Frost immediately. Full cooperation with federal authorities. And we need to implement immediate diversity reforms. What about the federal contracts? Asked the interim CEO. Gone. All of them. The government suspended every contract pending investigation results. We're looking at potential bankruptcy if this gets worse. Government lawyers in Washington began the process of reviewing every contract awarded to Frost Technologies. The falsified diversity reports that Edmund Frost had personally approved would cost the company hundreds of millions in penalties and lost business. At FBI headquarters, Agent Nora Callahan sat in Detective Aaron Holt's office, finally removing the cover identity she had maintained for 6 months. The stress of living undercover, enduring daily racism while building a federal case, had taken its toll. Outstanding work, Agent Callahan. The recordings you obtained will make this case airtight. Frost's own words condemn him on every count. What's the timeline for prosecution? She asked, thinking about Terrence Brooks and Rosa Delgado and the other victims waiting for justice. Federal prosecutors want to fast-track this. With the evidence we have, they're confident of conviction on all counts. Frost is looking at serious prison time. Agent Nora Callahan nodded with satisfaction. 6 months of systematic humiliation and racist harassment had produced a federal case that would send Edmund Frost to prison and compensate his victims. In his federal holding cell, Edmund Frost sat on the narrow bench, still wearing his expensive suit, but now understanding the magnitude of his miscalculation. The woman he had dismissed as a troublesome diversity hire had been documenting his every crime. The cell door clanged shut with finality as Edmund Frost realized that decades of discrimination and systematic racism had finally caught up with him. His empire was crumbling, his freedom was gone, and the black woman he had fired for having an attitude problem had just destroyed his life with methodical precision. Agent Nora Callahan's 6-month investigation would become a landmark case in federal civil rights enforcement, proving that systematic discrimination would not be tolerated and that justice, though sometimes delayed, would ultimately prevail. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the federal courthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors as dozens of reporters, civil rights advocates, and former Frost Technologies employees gathered outside courtroom 4A. 6 months after the arrests that shocked the corporate world, United States v. Edmund Frost had become more than just another discrimination case. It represented a watershed moment in federal civil rights enforcement, a landmark trial that would determine whether systematic workplace racism could hide behind corporate respectability. Agent Nora Callahan adjusted her red blazer and matching red dress pants as she walked through the courthouse corridors, her FBI credentials displayed prominently on her lapel. The transformation from undercover employee to federal witness had been complete, but the weight of what she documented during those 6 months at Frost Technologies still pressed heavily on her shoulders. Today, she would present the evidence that could send Edmund Frost to federal prison for decades. Inside the packed courtroom, Judge Margaret Thornton took her position behind the bench, her silver hair pulled back in a stern bun, her judicial robes flowing as she surveyed the assembled crowd. At 62, Judge Thornton had presided over numerous civil rights cases, but none had generated the media attention and public scrutiny of this prosecution. The defendant's table sat Edmund Frost, his once confident demeanor replaced by the haggard appearance of a man whose empire had crumbled around him. His expensive gray suit and blue tie couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the nervous tremor in his hands. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Chen began her opening statement, her voice carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. "Over the next several days, you will hear evidence of a criminal conspiracy that spanned decades, a systematic effort to deny equal opportunity to American workers based solely on the color of their skin." You will hear the defendant's own words, recorded during a 6-month federal investigation that revealed the true scope of his criminal enterprise. Edmund Frost's defense attorney, Jonathan Pierce, a silver-haired corporate lawyer in an expensive navy suit and gold tie, shifted uncomfortably as Chen continued her opening. The evidence against his client was overwhelming, but Pierce had built his reputation on defending the indefensible, on finding technicalities and procedural errors that could create reasonable doubt even in the most damning cases. "The prosecution will ask you to believe that my client, a respected businessman who built one of the region's most successful technology companies, deliberately violated federal law," Pierce countered when his turn came. "They will present recordings taken without his knowledge, testimony from disgruntled former employees seeking financial compensation, and interpretations of business decisions that had legitimate non-discriminatory motivations." But as the trial progressed, Pierce's confidence began to erode under the weight of evidence that Agent Nora Callahan and Detective Aaron Holt had methodically assembled. When Agent Nora Callahan took the witness stand on the second day, wearing a professional red blouse and black dress pants, her testimony transformed the abstract charges into a vivid narrative of systematic discrimination. "Agent Callahan, please describe the scope of your undercover investigation," Chen requested, her tone respectful but direct. "Over 6 months, I documented 847 instances of discriminatory behavior, ranging from hiring decisions to promotional opportunities to termination procedures," Agent Nora Callahan replied, her voice steady and professional. "I recorded 127 conversations where defendant Edmund Frost or his senior executives made explicitly racist statements about black employees, Hispanic workers, and what they termed diversity hires." The courtroom fell silent as Chen played selected recordings, Edmund Frost's voice filling the space with casual bigotry that made several jurors shift uncomfortably in their seats. "These people don't have the work ethic for this industry," his recorded voice declared during a management meeting. "I'm tired of the government forcing us to lower our standards just to hit some arbitrary diversity numbers." Edmund Frost's face flushed red as his own words condemned him, his attorney frantically scribbling notes while trying to maintain composure. The defense had hoped to portray these statements as taken out of context, but the sheer volume and consistency of the recordings made that strategy impossible. Detective Aaron Holt, wearing his standard FBI uniform of a long-sleeved white shirt and dark blue tie, presented the financial evidence that elevated the case from employment discrimination to federal racketeering. His muscular frame commanded attention as he methodically explained how Frost Technologies had fraudulently obtained over $40 million in government contracts by falsifying diversity reports while simultaneously maintaining discriminatory hiring practices. The defendant personally approved the submission of false documentation to federal agencies, Detective Aaron Holt testified, referring to financial records displayed on courtroom screens. Internal emails show Edmund Frost directing subordinates to make the numbers look good for the feds, while privately boasting about keeping his workforce appropriately selective. The most devastating testimony came from the victims themselves. Terrence Brooks, wearing a conservative blue suit and tie, his voice trembling with controlled emotion, described how his career had been systematically destroyed after he questioned racist jokes during team meetings. "I had the highest performance ratings in my department for 3 consecutive years," Terrence testified, looking directly at the jury. "But after I reported the hostile work environment, suddenly nothing I did was good enough. My projects were reassigned, my access to training programs revoked, and my salary frozen while less qualified white colleagues received promotions and raises." Rosa Delgado, dressed in a professional red suit that reflected her determination to be heard, provided equally compelling testimony about retaliation she faced after reporting sexual harassment. "When I filed my complaint, Mr. Frost personally called me into his office," she testified, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He told me that troublemakers don't last long in his company, that perhaps I'd be happier somewhere that appreciated my type more." The prosecution's case gained additional momentum when Diane Prescott took the stand, wearing a red cardigan over a white blouse. Her accounting background evident in her precise, detailed testimony about financial fraud. As the company's former senior accountant, she had been ordered to manipulate diversity statistics and exclude minority-owned contractors from bidding processes. Edmund Frost personally instructed me to create 2 sets of books. Diane testified, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the silent courtroom. One showed actual hiring and contracting practices. The other contained fabricated diversity numbers for government submissions. When I expressed concerns about legal implications, he told me that bleeding heart bureaucrats would never audit the numbers anyway. The defense case crumbled further when Victor Caldwell, the corrupt city councilman, who had facilitated many of Edmund Frost's discriminatory schemes, agreed to testify against his former conspirator in exchange for a reduced sentence. Caldwell, wearing an orange jumpsuit that marked his status as a cooperating witness, provided insider testimony about the political corruption that had protected Frost Technologies from oversight. Edmund Frost contributed heavily to my campaigns with the explicit understanding that I would use my influence to minimize civil rights enforcement, Caldwell testified, avoiding eye contact with his former partner. He frequently complained about federal diversity requirements and asked me to use my connections to reduce regulatory scrutiny of his hiring practices. Edmund Frost's decision to testify in his own defense proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Wearing a conservative blue suit with a red tie, his usual arrogance replaced by desperate defensiveness, he attempted to portray himself as a victim of government overreach and employee dishonesty. "I built Frost Technologies from nothing," he declared during direct examination, his voice carrying traces of his old confidence. "Every decision I made was based on merit, on what was best for the company and our shareholders. If some employees felt overlooked, it was because of their performance, not their race." But during cross-examination, Prosecutor Chen systematically dismantled his denials by playing recording after recording of his own racist statements. "Mr. Frost, is this your voice saying that black employees bring nothing but problems and attitude to the workplace?" she asked, playing a particularly damning conversation that was taken out of context. Edmund Frost replied weakly, perspiration visible on his forehead despite the air conditioning. What context would make such a statement appropriate? Chen pressed, her voice sharp with prosecutorial focus. Edmund Frost's silence stretched uncomfortably before Judge Thornton instructed him to answer. "I was frustrated about specific performance issues," he finally mumbled, his explanation clearly inadequate. The pattern repeated for hours as Chen confronted Edmund Frost with his own recorded words, each denial making him appear more dishonest to the jury. His attempts to claim ignorance of discriminatory practices fell apart when confronted with emails bearing his signature and voice recordings of him personally ordering discriminatory actions. After 4 days of devastating testimony and overwhelming evidence, the case went to the jury on a Friday afternoon. Legal experts had predicted lengthy deliberations given the complexity of the charges, but the jurors' swift return, after only 4 hours of discussion, signaled their unanimous agreement about Edmund Frost's guilt. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Thornton asked, as the courtroom packed with spectators, reporters, and former Frost Technologies employees held their collective breath. "We have, Your Honor," replied the jury foreman, a middle-aged black man whose expression revealed nothing as he handed the verdict to the court clerk. "On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." "On the charge of mail fraud in connection with government contracts, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." The litany continued through 18 separate charges, each guilty verdict striking Edmund Frost like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged with each pronouncement, his face growing paler as the full scope of his criminal liability became clear. Behind him, Agent Nora Callahan felt tears of relief and vindication streaming down her cheeks as 6 months of dangerous undercover work finally achieved justice.
Terrence Brooks and Rosa Delgado embraced in the gallery, their families weeping with joy at the vindication they had thought might never come. Detective Aaron Holt nodded grimly, satisfied that his investigation had achieved its purpose but already thinking about the dozen other corporate discrimination cases waiting for similar federal attention.
3 weeks later, Edmund Frost returned to the same courtroom for sentencing, his expensive suits replaced by the orange jumpsuit of a convicted felon awaiting prison. Judge Thornton, wearing her judicial robes with particular gravity, reviewed victim impact statements before pronouncing judgment. "Mr. Frost, your crimes represent more than financial fraud or employment discrimination," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "You systematically denied the American dream to dozens of families based solely on racial prejudice. You corrupted government contracting processes and undermined the civil rights protections that define our democracy." The sentence was harsh but appropriate. 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release, plus $8.2 million in restitution to victims and civil penalties. Edmund Frost's assets, including his mansion, luxury cars, and investment accounts, would be liquidated to compensate the families whose lives he had destroyed through decades of discrimination. As federal marshals led Edmund Frost away in shackles, Agent Nora Callahan watched from the gallery with quiet satisfaction. The investigation that had begun with her termination for having an attitude problem had exposed systematic criminal behavior that extended far beyond one company's discriminatory practices. The precedent established by United States v. Edmund Frost would strengthen federal civil rights enforcement for generations, proving that no amount of wealth or corporate respectability could protect criminals who violated the fundamental principle of equal opportunity under law. Outside the courthouse, Terrence Brooks and Rosa Delgado spoke to assembled reporters about their long journey from wrongful termination to federal vindication. "This victory belongs to every worker who has faced discrimination, but was afraid to speak out," Terrence declared, his voice strong with conviction. Agent Nora Callahan risked her safety to document the truth, and her courage has created change that will protect thousands of families. Justice had been served, but the real work of rebuilding careers, healing communities, and preventing future discrimination was just beginning. 6 months after Edmund Frost's conviction sent shockwaves through corporate America, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of what was once Frost Technologies' executive boardroom. The nameplate outside now read Phoenix Tech Solutions, and the atmosphere inside couldn't have been more different from the toxic environment Agent Nora Callahan had infiltrated just over a year ago. Terrence Brooks adjusted his green button-down shirt and navy blazer as he reviewed the quarterly diversity metrics spread across the conference table. As the newly appointed Senior Vice President of Engineering and Diversity Initiatives, he still sometimes had to remind himself that this wasn't a dream. The same building where Edmund Frost had systematically destroyed black careers now buzzed with the energy of genuine inclusion and innovation. "These numbers are remarkable," said the new CEO Sarah Chen, a Korean-American executive brought in by the federal monitors overseeing the company's transformation. 43% increase in minority hires, 37% increase in women in leadership roles, and our employee satisfaction scores are the highest in the industry. Agent Nora Callahan sat across from Terrence, wearing a red blazer over a crisp white blouse and black slacks. She was here today not as the undercover operative who had brought down a criminal empire, but as a guest speaker for the company's first annual Civil Rights and Workplace Justice Summit. Her FBI credentials gleamed in the morning light, a far cry from the fake employee badge she'd worn during those grueling 6 months of gathering evidence. "What strikes me most," Agent Nora Callahan said, "is how quickly positive change can happen when leadership is genuinely committed to justice. The same building, many of the same employees, but a completely different culture." Rosa Delgado entered the conference room, her confident stride marking her transformation from a broken, wrongfully terminated engineer to a successful entrepreneur. She wore a red blouse tucked into black pants, her consulting firm's logo embroidered discreetly on her collar. The settlement money from Edmund Frost's liquidated assets had allowed her to launch Delgado Diversity Consulting, which now worked with 12 Fortune 500 companies to prevent the kind of systematic discrimination she had endured. "I'm sorry I'm running late," Rosa said, setting down her briefcase. "I was just finishing a call with the Department of Justice. They want to use our inclusion model as a template for 3 other companies currently under federal investigation." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The same woman Edmund Frost had fired for communication issues was now being sought after by federal agencies and major corporations for her expertise in building equitable workplaces. Detective Aaron Holt walked in wearing his new FBI task force uniform. his muscular frame filling out the dark blue long-sleeved shirt with federal insignia. His promotion to head the newly formed Corporate Civil Rights Enforcement Division had come with the recognition that Agent Nora Callahan's undercover operation had created a blueprint for investigating systematic workplace discrimination. The Phoenix Tech model is already being studied at Quantico, Detective Aaron Holt announced. We've had requests from field offices in Atlanta, Chicago, and Los Angeles to replicate the investigation techniques Agent Nora Callahan pioneered here. As the morning progressed, the group reviewed the comprehensive changes that had swept through not just the company, but the entire community. The federal court had ordered Edmund Frost's personal assets, including his mansion and investment portfolio, to be liquidated for victim restitution. Terrence Brooks's family had not only saved their home from foreclosure, but had been able to establish college funds for his children. Rosa Delgado's twins were now enrolled in private schools, their futures secured by educational trusts funded by the settlement. Linda Nguyen, the Asian American data analyst, who had found the courage to testify against Edmund Frost, had been promoted to Director of Analytics. She now led a team of 12 diverse professionals, many of whom were hired specifically to replace the toxic culture Edmund Frost had fostered with one of collaboration and mutual respect. The company's financial turnaround had been as dramatic as its cultural transformation. Phoenix Tech Solutions had not only retained most of its government contracts, but had won 3 new major deals, specifically because of its demonstrated commitment to equality and inclusion. The federal monitoring that initially seemed like punishment had become a competitive advantage as other agencies sought partners with verified track records of fair employment practices. Agent Nora Callahan's phone buzzed with a text from Gabriela Morales, the investigative journalist whose expose had helped bring national attention to the case. Her series, The Frost Files, Inside America's Most Corrupt Corporation, had won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting, and she was now working on a book deal to tell the complete story of systematic corporate racism in American business. Gabriela wants to interview all of us for her book, Agent Nora Callahan said. She believes our story represents something larger happening across corporate America. And indeed it did. The Frost case had triggered a wave of federal investigations into workplace discrimination at major corporations. The Department of Justice had opened 17 new cases using the evidence-gathering techniques Agent Nora Callahan had refined during her undercover operation. 3 other CEOs had already been indicted on similar charges, and dozens of companies had voluntarily implemented diversity reforms rather than risk federal investigation. The local NAACP chapter, which had organized community support during the darkest days of the investigation, now worked directly with Phoenix Tech Solutions to ensure lasting change. Their partnership had created internship programs for inner-city students, scholarship funds for minority students pursuing STEM degrees, and mentorship networks connecting established professionals with young people entering the workforce. As the summit preparation continued, Agent Nora Callahan reflected on the personal cost and ultimate reward of her undercover work. The 6 months of enduring daily microaggressions, documenting systematic racism, and maintaining her cover while watching colleagues suffer had been the most challenging assignment of her career. But seeing Terrence Brooks in his executive office, watching Rosa Delgado mentor young engineers through her consulting work, and knowing that their courage had prevented thousands of other workers from experiencing similar discrimination made every difficult moment worthwhile. The afternoon brought the main event, Agent Nora Callahan's keynote address to an audience of law enforcement officials, corporate leaders, and civil rights advocates from across the region. The Phoenix Tech Auditorium was packed with over 400 attendees, including federal agents studying her methods, corporate executives learning about compliance, and community leaders celebrating the victory against systematic racism. 18 months ago, I walked into this building as Nora the diversity hire with an attitude problem. Agent Nora Callahan began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Edmund Frost saw a black woman he could easily dismiss and discard. He never imagined that his casual racism and systematic discrimination were being documented by a federal agent trained to see patterns of criminal behavior. The audience was captivated as she detailed the investigation's methodology, the legal precedents established by the case, and the ongoing impact on federal civil rights enforcement. But it was her personal reflections that resonated most deeply. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence or maintaining my cover, she continued. It was watching good people suffer while I couldn't immediately help them. Seeing Terrence Brooks's confidence eroded by constant microaggressions. Watching Rosa Delgado struggle to support her children after being wrongfully terminated. Knowing that every day of investigation meant another day of injustice for the people I was trying to protect. The emotional weight of her words was evident as several audience members wiped away tears. Detective Aaron Holt, sitting in the front row, nodded with understanding. He had seen the personal toll the operation had taken on his partner. The sleepless nights spent reviewing recordings of Edmund Frost's racist rants. The frustration of building a perfect legal case while people continued to suffer. But transformation is possible, Agent Nora Callahan said, gesturing toward Terrence Brooks and Rosa Delgado in the audience. Not just punishment for wrongdoing, but genuine change that creates opportunities for everyone. Phoenix Tech Solutions isn't just a renamed company with new policies. It's proof that American businesses can be profitable, innovative, and genuinely inclusive when leadership chooses justice over prejudice. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, but the real celebration began afterward, at the company's diversity reception, the same executive dining room where Edmund Frost had held strategy sessions about avoiding federal discrimination laws, now hosted a celebration of multicultural success and collaboration. Agent Nora Callahan found herself surrounded by young FBI agents and Justice Department prosecutors who wanted to learn from her experience. The investigation had become required study material at the FBI Academy, and her techniques were being taught to federal agents across the country. The key, she explained to a group of eager trainees, is understanding that discrimination isn't just individual prejudice. It's systematic behavior that follows predictable patterns. Edmund Frost thought he was clever, but bigotry makes people sloppy. They document their crimes in emails. They brag about their schemes in recorded conversations, and they always underestimate the people they're targeting. As the evening wound down, Agent Nora Callahan, Terrence Brooks, and Rosa Delgado found themselves alone on the building's roof terrace, looking out over a city that had been transformed by their courage to fight systematic injustice. The skyline glittered with possibilities that hadn't existed when Edmund Frost ruled this corporate empire through fear and discrimination. Sometimes I think about him, Rosa admitted, sitting in that federal prison cell, finally understanding that actions have consequences. I think about all the people who will never experience what we went through, Terrence added. The young black engineers who'll be hired based on their qualifications, the Latina managers who'll be promoted without having to prove themselves twice as hard, the Asian analysts who'll speak up without fear of retaliation. Agent Nora Callahan smiled, feeling the satisfaction that comes from a mission truly accomplished. One investigation, thousands of lives changed. That's the real power of civil rights enforcement. The transformation was indeed remarkable. Edmund Frost's criminal enterprise had been completely dismantled, his co-conspirators prosecuted, and his victims not just compensated, but empowered to create change themselves. Phoenix Tech Solutions had become a model for corporate responsibility. The FBI had refined its approach to investigating systematic discrimination, and communities across America had been inspired to demand better from their employers. As they prepared to leave, Agent Nora Callahan took one last look around the building where she had spent 6 months documenting systematic racism and building the case that would change everything. The same fluorescent lights that had illuminated Edmund Frost's crimes now shone on genuine diversity, authentic inclusion, and the kind of workplace justice that creates opportunity for everyone. The story that began with one black woman being fired for having an attitude problem had become a landmark case in American civil rights enforcement. Agent Nora Callahan's courage to infiltrate, document, and expose systematic discrimination had created ripple effects that would protect workers for generations to come. Walking out into the evening air, surrounded by colleagues who had become friends and allies who had become family, Agent Nora Callahan felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that sometimes justice isn't just served, it transforms everything it touches. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.